Make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Religious freedom or religious pluralism really is that is the cog in the machine that makes all of this work. And as a historian, America's history is very ugly. The founding fathers are very controversial. But when we talk about this specific line of logic, even though it was implemented by white, rich, patriarchal, aristocrat, slave owners, and rapist racists, that line of thinking is what allowed Jews to be able to vote very early on, Catholics to be able to vote very on, like women, and then as it expanded, that line of logic has been what has allowed so much of our civil rights to come to fruition.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. He is not here today. He said something about saving Christianity for all mankind or something, so he'll be back next time. But instead, we have with us Leigh Larson. She is a historian, theologian, veteran, public scholar, all the things, has a platform called Follow the Leighder, which reaches about 245,000 people, which is a lot more than we do, and holds a Master of Theological Studies from Phillips Theological Seminary, where her thesis examined Christian nationalism and U.S. military chaplaincy. And she's got a whole bunch of awards here. I'm not going to read them all. She's very, very smart and intelligent. So I'm just going to stop there, welcome her to the show, and then ask her, why does she get into what she's doing? So welcome to the show, Leigh.
Oh, howdy, Will, and howdy to Will's followers and listeners. Howdy, folks. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. So tell us, like, your CV, your life, your career, your field path is a very, very complete bag of a whole bunch of different things. And it seems like you've landed finally kind of on the chaplaincy and Christian nationalism topic, which is really, really interesting to me. But I'd love to just learn a little bit more about who is Leigh Larson and kind of what brought you to the place you're at today.
Absolutely. Well, I am from Fort Worth, Texas. I was actually born in Houston, but raised in Fort Worth, Texas. My family initially, my mother, we started the Episcopal Church in Houston at St. John's the Divine. We moved up to Fort Worth, and that diocese in Fort Worth was a bit more conservative and didn't want to recognize her divorce. So she left the Episcopal Church in Fort Worth, at least, switched to Disciples of Christ, which is a totally kind of different experience. It's non-creedal, non-creedal, very much, I want to say more like on the low or casual side versus the Episcopal High Church, and just a different experience. But also it was right across from TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. So I had a queer youth pastor, I had an Army reservist youth pastor, I saw female head pastors and Black choir directors. It was a really cool, saw a lot of different faces and a lot of leadership positions growing up. And that connection with my Army reservist youth pastor was critical. And that youth pastor in particular, was really critical when I went through, or my friend group, we all went through a suicide in middle school. And I got to see this youth pastor come in and be there for a group of middle school kids, and then about face go out and serve our country, once a month. And I was really inspired by that. I went on to University of Texas at Austin, and I wasn't necessarily inspired to go into ministry or theology at that point, but I just knew how important theology was to humanness. I was whoa, clearly theology played a huge role in a bunch of middle schoolers going through a very adult life concept. And then obviously it plays a huge role in the military, which I would never have thought without probably seeing it up close, and particularly because I was more in the liberal or progressive churches. And we'll touch on this later in the hopefully in this conversation, but Protestant mainline, or even progressive or quote left-leaning, however you want to put those words now, really haven't been too supportive of military chaplaincy since Vietnam. They haven't denounced it necessarily. They've like denounced war, they've denounced American policies, but military, but since Vietnam War, if you were to go into chaplaincy on this side of the quote political aisle in the churches, it would have been hospital, prison, something not military, because military in war is just a complex theological thing to talk about as a chaplain. And so I'm sorry, I went down a tangent, but my point being, that was just kind of the first time that I saw how important theology was to people. But I was also very much interested in justice and was kind of leaning more towards like the law side. Like I thought I was going to go into international humanitarian or international law. I majored in international relations as an undergrad at University of Texas. I also pursued very much interested in I love the outdoors, and I looked into environmental science specifically in Africa, looking at grassroots movements there. Got to spend 6 weeks in Botswana studying sustainable wildlife, tourism efforts, and being around, again, like outdoor public lands type folks. And
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but according to your, I believe it was on Instagram, like, did you just recently take a training from the National Park Service?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, like it was just like a 4-day, 32-hour training. And yeah, I loved it. And again, I love all the park rangers I've come across. I just love being outdoors. But because of that, I also got to meet Peace Corps volunteers, because I thought I was going to go into Peace Corps. And this all kind of ties into, I wanted to do public service, civic service for 2 years at least. I also had the reserve youth pastor in my background, but I'd done some international travel. I saw other countries that had civic service as mandated. I don't think it should be mandated, but I saw the benefit to serving your country for 2 years in some capacity, your government, your military. And I thought I was going to go Peace Corps, but actually it was meeting some of the Peace Corps people abroad. They were like, just go into the military, it pays more. I wrestled with that too. I talked to quite a number of people, and actually I eventually kind of went back to it. It did come down to pragmatics and student loans, and that plays a huge role when I talk about a lot of folks do not join the military because they're joining it for imperial purposes. It really is pragmatic, economic, or for a lot of, anyway. So that's how I got into at least calling into the military, and that way, as I started building that, I reconnected with a high school boyfriend. I reshared this story too, that he went into Air Force Special Ops. His family stepped out of Special Ops as well, and I was already doing internships with youth ministry and all sorts of stuff. So it was very much a natural, go into chaplaincy. We need a great here's what we need in chaplains. And I'm being told by a dude, multiple deployments, special ops, things he saw that were good and bad by chaplains he's come across. And he was like, we just need chaplains that can tolerate an open conversation and can hold a lot of space. I have too many chaplains that just want to shove a Bible, a verse, some story, and that's the last thing I want to take on when I've experienced something like combat. And it was just really formative. So I go into the chaplain corps. In fact, part of my studying going into the chaplain corps was a lot of diverse faiths, not because I was going to perform any rituals or rites or anything, but if someone came, did I have a general idea of your vocab or, just generally speaking, so that I could assist and help you. And that's eventually went into the chaplain corps, and it was not this pluralistic experience I thought it was going to be within the chaplaincy. The ministry was beautiful. That was fantastic. It was more internal bureaucrat stuff that I became keen on. Other female chaplain candidates that served with me, we've reconnected over the years, some queer, trans, and anyway, at some point, I know this is I'm chatting, folks, but at some point,
I'm listening.
But I guess somewhere in there, COVID makes all the years, but somewhere around COVID, I was just done with organized religion, which was wild because when people talk about deconstructing, I never really deconstructed theology. That wasn't that largely stayed. I mean, it expanded because I'm in seminary and I'm reading and I'm still very a faithful person. That's always changing, growing. But I mean, like, I didn't come from one side of the spectrum and go the other way. It was just I became completely disillusioned with institutional control of who gets to say God is, like from both the military chaplaincy to organized religion. And it wasn't a hate. It was almost like a deep understanding that churches and institutions like the military serve a purpose. They have to do what they're doing. You have to have boundaries of some capacity. But for me and for what I was trying to do, I just couldn't stay entrenched or enmeshed with an institution. Even though I still support, I do contract work with institution. It's not a hate. It's just more of like, I think we're just reckoning a lot with spirituality in the church. And I think a lot of us are right now. It's not so that kind of catches you up at one point. Or so, yes, I left the church. I left organized religion again, stayed very spiritual state. I just like, and I left my master's midway through. And so about a few years ago, I was like, I need to go finish that for me. And just like, it bothers me. Went back and had a whole different experience with it, as you do when you go back different years later and a different person. Got deeply into women's history and indigenous women's history in the United States under United States policy, like how Christian American policy impacted women and indigenous folks throughout American history. And also just particularly because I am out west, I'm in Montana for folks who were like, what are you in? And that also was like, reconnected with a lot of military folks. We have 10% of our population is military affiliated here, probably even more like 20. And started sharing a lot of stories, started hearing a lot of trends, started hearing that I wasn't and I was talking about what I experienced in the chaplaincy, but now I'm hearing it from folks, that were supposed to be the ones helped and they weren't. And I was like, okay, all right. So this is not personal. This is not a unique. I was like, I'm going to research this. And so, like I said, once I started researching and going down the rabbit hole, I mean, your audience is very familiar with what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was like, oh, this is very well organized. And here we are. So.
That is one thing that stands out in your story is almost similar to like just our own story, just for the podcast and just others that are kind of in this space, is that number one, in society, there are not enough religion reporters, like full stop. Like they're like most major networks don't even have a religion reporter. Right. And folks like yourself that have this very kind of unique like expertise are finding things, that like the New York Times should be finding, like when they revise like the religion codes and stuff and the chaplain corps, like which I'm going to ask you about here in a minute. Like I found out about that just from reading your Instagram, to be honest. And then the story just came out just recently. I don't know if they gave you any credit or not, but it really just kind of just drives home the point that, folks like you and others, are doing really, really important work that are kind of exposing some things that the public could, have an interest in. So I want to ask you about the chaplain corps. I'm former military myself. Yeah, thanks. And I thank you for your service. Why do we still say that, actually? It's weird, right?
At this point, like it's weird. I'm on the other side of it, that it's like, at first I was like, don't say it, but I've met so many people that are messed up because of the military that I'm like, thank you for that. But I'm not going to say thank you for your suffering.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
right.
So now I'm just like, thank you for what you've given up. I don't, what I mean?
It's like I'm on a lot of my old military buddies were on a group chat. And so I won't disclose too much, because just even announcing the disclosure that there is a group chat of old infantry guys, some in the group are, like former special forces. Like, on Veterans Day, sometimes we'll say, thank you for your service to each other. Just kind of as a bit of, tongue in cheek, like, right. Yeah, this is kind of what, not non-veterans say to veterans. But anyways, when I joined the military, this was back in shortly after 9/11, it's probably like January 2002 or something like that. I went into the service, met a whole bunch of people. Your characterization of not everybody goes into the military for patriotic reasons. Like, I served with folks that were like court ordered in, folks that like were about to be homeless, and it's like, we get deployed over to Iraq. We're not thinking we're doing this for America. We're over there and we're kicking down doors and we're doing this for each other because we don't want anybody to get hurt, But we did have a chaplain that was attached to us there. Real nice guys, black dude. I forgot his name, but I've got a photo of him with the book I was reading at the time because I bought a book. You remember those like Dummies Guide to whatever? Like I bought one of those. It's yellow cover, like the Dummies Guide to the Bible. And I was reading that because I legitimately thought when I went to Iraq, I was going to die. And I'm like, I got to figure this out. And I didn't want to read the Bible. So I bought the Dummy's Guide to the Bible. I just need the cliff notes, like what are the important parts? Oh, yeah. and there's a photo of my chaplain holding the book because I just thought it'd be the funniest thing. But he was a very important person to our unit, at least like just morally, he was very upbeat and he seemed like he was torn from a different cloth. So I'm curious, like walk us through, how does someone actually become a chaplain? And do they get to pick like the religion that they're a chaplain for? Or I'm just really intrigued by it.
Well, great question. And that is a hilarious story. I think that's funny. I probably would have done the same. That is so funny. If you had come into me and asked that, I would have been like, here's this book. Maybe I'll give you the even shorter one. I'll give you the summary of each chapter on that one. But no. So as far as becoming a chaplain, you have to go through and get an MDiv and be endorsed by a DOD recognized endorser. They are the ones that are pretty much going to handle your education and your theology. This is the way that the military, the state, the government separates itself from any sort of theological formation. Like, we are just here, like, if your people have educated and trained in your approval, we'll accept them, and we're just going to put them right into commissioned officer training, and then they'll go through chaplain training. If they're in seminary, which is what I was, if they're in seminary, they'll go through chaplain candidate training, which is, you just stay in as sort of like this weird gray role while you're in seminary, and then you become a full chaplain after you graduate, become ordained. So those are the two paths. That chaplain candidate program I just talked about, that is something that's started in the last 10, 15 years. I don't want to say that, but really it's a response. It used to be that the military would outright pay for seminary for their chaplains, and then those chaplains were beholden to the military, and now you're in the service. But then what happened if a chaplain had a crisis of faith, and now you've got this chaplain? It was a mess. And now they were like, well, we're not going to pay for anything while you're in seminary, but once you become a full chaplain, we'll give you this bonus. We'll give you sort of this like back pay or, whatever. And so that was really cool for both sides, because that meant I could serve without any sort of, what if this doesn't work out for me? Which it didn't, because and then on the other side, for them, no harm, no foul. They weren't committed. The taxpayer wasn't committed to anything long term. So it was a fantastic program on the Air Force side. I can't speak to what it is for others. I can tell you again, I went through commissioned officer training. So we do not receive weapons training. We are also not command and control. So chaplains cannot pick up a weapon. If we do, we become combatant, but we are non-combatant. That is definitely since the 1940s. We do have some older American Revolution stories with chaplains running around with muskets and, the cross and this very iconic colonial sort of image. But really, since World War II, a lot of Geneva codes, chaplains and medics are kind of considered offhands. I think medics can carry weapons, but anyway, the point being, so my chaplain training, again, commissioned officer training, there was no weapons, again, no command and control. Even if I'm the highest ranking person, a chaplain's the highest ranking, they can't give orders. We're not trained in that. We could get people hurt if we do. Our sole purpose is the spiritual readiness of the force. So I hope that clears things up.
It does, and I can't help but think like, because I've always had this question. We talk a lot about church and state on this show, and it seems like chaplaincy at its core is like the perfect blending of the two. I mean, near as I understand American history, there was a time when like churches were funded by the state, and then that was put to a halt, and it sort of created this like somewhat of a capitalistic market for like churches to become more boisterous, to get more congregants. At least that's the way it was stated to me. I think by John Fia. Don't quote me on that, but within sort of the American government, like we are paying people like here's something I always joke with Josh. Like he's a full-time pastor. He's got to deal with all the normal pastor stuff, like, how you pay the light bills and all that other kind of thing, and I'm like, wouldn't it be great to just be like a chaplain and not have to worry about like your building or anything like that? It just seems really weird. So help me understand church state separation kind of through the lens of being a chaplain.
Yeah, great question. So it might help it to give some historical context, because I also see this kind of online and being shared. So George Washington did initiate the chaplain corps. It was one of his first things that he did. He felt very strongly that if the government, state, were to ask folks to die for their country, they should be provided with spiritual care. A very simple argument. James Madison argued against him. That was between the two of them. James Madison and Washington were not in agreement about military chaplains. But Washington won out. I mean, he was a highly respected man, obviously, and felt very seriously. And initially, he had no problem getting pastors, because like you said, it was abundant back then, and you had pastors coming out volunteering from town. So it wasn't a pastor problem. What he wanted were pastors who went through training and saw what the soldiers saw. He didn't want this sort of like Sunday, kind of visiting pastor type thing. The other thing was, while George Washington, he was Anglican, he was a very, very wealthy man, very powerful man. He might have been. I know the more particularly on this deconstruction, I'm not a deconstruction, but like and knowing that language and that lens, sometimes I look at these founding fathers. I'm like, are you deconstructing? Yeah. Was deism your deconstruction? Like,
I know, right?
And so I don't think he probably didn't like organized religion like the rest. None of them were really in favor of the priestly class, much like Jesus Christ was in the Gospels that we can talk about. Like, there also wasn't. He knew that when you have a pastor, if you have someone spiritual in the room, it does impact morale. It does change the dynamics of the room. Just having a pastor, like, he doesn't have to say, pastor doesn't have to preach anything. But just having one that's around constantly changes the dynamics. It impacts alcoholism, prostitution, gambling. Also, we're seeing a lot. It's cool to read military sermons over time, chaplain sermons, particularly in light of the ones that Hegseth is sharing. And I don't know what I'm allowed to say on here, so I don't want to
say anything you want, please.
Particularly in light with what Hegseth is sharing, because we have American chaplains have always invoked God bless our troops, protect us. That's almost general language. Even as a chaplain, most people were pretty comfortable with me saying like, "Oh, holy, please protect and comfort these," and then like walk away. Like, those are really generic invocation prayers that aren't claiming anything. They're not claiming anything. They're except for protection for you. But there's no gender, socio-political large statement when you make those. What's happening in the chaplain corps when you talk about separation of church and state? Historically, we've always had these very general invocations of God and protection. What is really coming out is this, particularly since 9/11, also Vietnam War. I can talk about that too if you want, where they really want to put "in Jesus' name" literally in the when they pray in a mixed group. In a military, there's two litmus tests that we're kind of seeing over and over. They want a lot of evangelical chaplains are wanting to proselytize more. They're wanting to talk more about everything is in Jesus' name. And then there's also the are your marriage retreat workshops biblical? Are they heteronormative? So you're seeing, and that's like the two ways that they're speaking in code to one another. How biblical are your marriage retreats? Do you pray in Jesus' name? And that is, again, we're seeing this over and over. We're also seeing on the ground, on the legislative level, a bill was put forth by Texan, I can't remember who it was, I'm drawing a blank. But again, it was to improve protections for chaplains' free speech because they want to be able to evangelize, proselytize, or claim specific sociopolitical remarks or beliefs or behaviors towards people because it's, quote, biblical. So it's a really fascinating turn that in the last few decades, we're seeing a very much more, it's almost like very chaplain focused. How is the chaplain safe? Is the chaplain protect? The chaplain was always protect, but it was never about you. Like it was just like you were supposed to go into this multi-faith, pluralistic environment and just be there. Just like listen, mitigate the chaos, add a sliver of morality or light or healing to a very savage place. I mean, it's hell. And so, but again, their argument, and I want to, because I'm studying and researching this, their argument is because it's hell, they want to go in and evangelize and proselytize and save. They feel very strongly about their mission. Unfortunately, like you said, separation of church and state. We have a First Amendment. So
yeah, it seems it's really concerning for me because, when you read and we've been fortunate enough to have Brian Kaler on. He's the president of Word and Way, and he's been writing about sort of like the Department of Defense and their sermons that they have there. Pete Hegseth and his, association with Doug Wilson and the CREC. So when I think of like the chaplains, especially under this Department of Defense, like it concerns me a little bit because they have some level of control over, the keepers of the soldiers, spiritual well-being. And especially with, this administration's, proclivity to implement Christian nationalism throughout every single department, it just doesn't feel right. So I'm curious, like in what ways, like, have you seen it? And I know that this kind of goes into your dissertation. It's like, in what ways have you kind of seen Christian nationalism mapped into kind of the chaplaincy?
Yeah. So I'll start with like my personal direct experience, and then I'll zoom way out because I want to kind of show the audience and you how far back this goes too. So again, as stated, I grew up in a congregation where I saw a lot of different faces, being the face of God and spiritual leadership. And that's how I thought I was going into it. I knew how diverse the military was. And I got in, and I was always like my mom, like we did a lot of ecumenical interfaith. So that, like, I was comfortable in pluralistic environments too, even growing up. So like I said, the ministry to the airmen was fantastic. I remember distinctly I got pulled to the side because I ministered to there was a Wiccan prayer. There was like a Wiccan ceremony that a Wiccan had asked me to go with her. She just wanted to go for the first time. Like, she was interested in this faith and she wanted someone to go with her. And she said, and so we go, and I sat with her, and anyway, I think towards the end or something, I responded in the call and response, because the call and response was God of the North, God of the East, God of the South, God of the West, hear our prayer. And that's what I did. And then I got in trouble for doing that part of the service. Like, somehow it got back that I had responded, and I told my chaplain, my trainer, I said, I didn't have any wiggle room to like talk back. Obviously, it's the military, but they were like, I think it's very concerning for your devotion to Christ that you were willing to go to a Wiccan ceremony and that you did the response. Can you explain yourself? I said, she asked me to go with her, and that one response, sir, that's within my theology, that God is the God of all cardinal directions. like what do you say? Like it was like a very 2-sentence, like, and 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 I just remember him like laying in, and he was a non-denominational chaplain, which is a very vague term, and it's hard to nail down because I've met some non-denominational folks that are incredible, right there with me, shoulder to shoulder, and then you've got folks like that. So that is the hard thing now, trying to catch folks up who aren't knowledgeable about Christianity, is that we are very fractured, and then the fractures are fractured, and everyone for themselves. But no, just kidding.
Quick note on that though. What's interesting, and I'm glad you actually brought up the response to you being in that space, because I think 2 years ago, we interviewed Lucian Greaves. And if you don't know who he is, he's the co-founder of the Satanic Temple. Great guy, super nice, really articulate. Yeah. But like when we booked him, I remember I was telling a lot of my friends, and Josh was telling a lot of his friends, and people were like, "How dare you? How dare you bring on, this person?" I'm like, I don't understand the drama. Like, we're just going to talk to him, and it sounds like you kind of went through a lot of the same thing just by committing the cardinal sin of going to a different faith's like gathering.
Yeah, that doing any sorts of response at that faith gathering, but also that particular chaplain and the chaplain above him, who was a colonel, didn't. From the get-go, the chaplain colonel, I don't know why I didn't lead with this story. Sorry. I always think of the Wiccans because I think that is such a prime example of like the ridiculousness of it. I was like, I was literally in the middle of doing my job. And then it's like, that's like a prime example. But another example is like in the training, Air Force chaplain candidate training, I want to say in the first week when we're going through all that orientation stuff, we had a chaplain colonel stand up and say, like, there's going to be a lot of us who don't believe in different things here. For example, I don't believe that women should be chaplains, but the Air Force does, and we're all here. And I remember like, it changed the tone for the rest of the time. Like we all had just gone through like commissioned officer training together, and now we had spent a week of chaplain candidates, and then like it came down, and it was this there were like 4 women that we just looked at each other and we were like, bro, like, and very unnecessary. Again, that dog whistling, that like, is it a biblical marriage retreat? Do you pray in Jesus' name? I don't think that women should be chaplains, but the policy, like, and so
it sounds like, and I'm not trying to get ahead of you here, but like it sounds like, if you think of Christian nationalism as like a framework, as like the Whitehead and Perry's define it, right, a cultural framework, and like some of the elements that you just identified, the sort of like reaction to going to a Wiccan thing, or some of the complementarianism stuff that you hear, it's like that's all part of the framework, like that those beliefs operate kind of within that Christian national framework. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
It absolutely does. And what's really, so that's my personal anecdotes. I have several, and now since doing my research and talking, I have hundreds of stories that people have submitted, and interviews and whatnot. But what's really fascinating is if you go back, that this, not only is it part of a framework, but it has been by design in the military chaplaincy since. Really, we see in the Vietnam War was a major turning point. There was some buildup. We can talk about the Cold War as well. But we see that in the Cold War, there is a deliberate change that we're talking about. We got a lot of Eisenhower, just like civil religion, and then like the godless communists, and America's are the Christian defenders of democracy. And we also start seeing a Judeo-Christian relationship forming that both has to do with the state of Israel, but it also has to do with Soviet. There's like geopolitical stuff going on that is now American, those in power are positioning it as a Christian thing as well. So really fascinating to watch the Cold War in a sort of Christian rhetoric lens. We see the Judeo-Christian alliance starting to form in the 40s and 50s. And really, the Vietnam War was a big turning point. Right before the Vietnam War, we have a letters, documents of an evangelical chaplain who evangelical, non-denominational, fundamentalists, this sort of thing, they broke away from the Protestant mainline and kind of went independent. We are not affiliated with anybody. We're going to do our own independent congregational thing. Over time, they coalesced, organized, and now they are like, they use a lot of the same material. They are sort of a denomination at this point. Like, I don't know what else to say. And now, officially, like, if the military publishes these faith codes, it says non-denominational as their faith codes. And I was like, so that's your name now.
Welcome to the faith. I go to the church of non-denominational.
Right. But we see documents as they're like right before the Vietnam War where they feel marginalized by the Protestants and by the mainline Protestants. They're like, there's no way for us to ever have power so long as the Episcopals, Anglicans, Methodists, Presbyterians, I'm probably for Baptists, these mainline are still dominating. And as it would turn for them, the Vietnam War and that footage, the live footage, was really hard for Protestant mainline Christians to rationalize from the pulpit. They started to dial back their support for war, dial back support for military chaplaincy, and instead emphasized a lot, whatever the more social justice stuff that has come out of progressive left for the last, some odd years. But the evangelical, conservative, fundamentalist, non-denominational, whatever you want to put that whole group, they continue to see this as their mission. And they were like, we are going to be the dominant chaplain corps. We are here to protect this country. We're here to serve this country. And they've been running this narrative that the left hates America since Vietnam because they felt like they were the only military chaplains left. And so we start to see them increase in representation after Vietnam, also because the progressives are starting to decrease, dial back. 9/11, huge wave, Trump, and now we're here. And so that kind of catches you up on, this was not only they've been doing the seven mountain mandate and Project 2025, and this has also been very deliberate internally and to take over church and state. They don't think that what the progressive or Protestant mainline Christians did was right. Like they think it's wrong. They think it's wrong. They absolutely want state, church and state. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like they don't really want church and state. They just want church state.
Right. Like it's just, yeah. But it is really fascinating, and I'm glad that you have such a political background because there is a sort of one of the things that now is interesting is the rhetoric around Jesus. We're seeing very different ways that Jesus is being presented, both on the right and the left, that it's very, very vocal because it's online. And that's what I've noticed is people being like, wait, how did you come up with that theology? Or like that. And it was just like, what do you mean? This is just always how I knew.
Yeah. I know. Hey, can I ask you about the chaplain codes? Because I know that there was a news story that came out recently. And you, again, talked a little bit about it on your Instagram. I'd love to just know kind of, what are these chaplain codes and what was it before? And then, what did it get reduced down to? And, maybe a little bit of like, what's going to be the impact of that?
The chaplain codes are really interesting because, like you pointed out, they are the DoD's definition of recognized faith. So it is a pseudo-establishment of the state. And again, we're having to deal with the minefield of institutions. So you want some sort of standards. You want to have yes, we have people that represent this faith in the chaplain corps. They have been endorsed by these people. They've met that endorser's standards. They're here so that others can get religious accommodations. Burial is very important. Last rites, what to do in the hospital. I mean, there's some... You've been in the military. You have to reckon with death. You have to, your religion is on your resume because that's a very real option there. And so these faith codes are the DoD approved list of endorsers, not even endorsers really, but of these beliefs. They're the legitimate list of who the DoD recognizes to be endorsed and to go out and either perform faith or to seek caregiving for the troops, and then also for the troops to claim for themselves. So now it's a lot of internal paperwork. It doesn't affect dog tags, these faith codes. In fact, the faith codes that I announced recently, those are still unofficial and unreleased, but I wouldn't be surprised in the next month if it's right around what that list looks like. Years ago, it is very controversial for the state to define a faith code and an endorser. It's very political, in defining it. B, you have a lot of people. These faith codes, you almost need to see more as like a list, not even like a list, but like a table of who is sitting at the table and represented in the Pentagon when it comes to faith matters. And we went from like 220 some odd faiths in the last 10 years because we were getting to that point of like, how do you define? We just everything, like we said, it's so fractured, and you just kept adding people. And then there was a lot of research done about humanism and more like secular chaplaincy in a way, and that there was bringing in agnostic, and that very much upset. Like, they were like, you already have women and queer chaplains, and you got trans folk, and now you got humanist chaplains. Like, what is the chaplain corps? Like, and this was their argument, and we were like, chaplain corps is a mutual aid. It's a mutual aid resource of faith and spiritual care. Like, this is and that's how we saw it, and that was always the tension. So now these faith codes, like I said, they bloomed up to something like 221 or something, and there was a whole bunch of faiths on there. There was a lot of folks who claimed that there were people taking advantage of all these faith codes to be able to have beards. Like, some were very devout, and it was related. Some were like, oh, I'll go be a Jedi. That was a recognized faith. And that was kind of what happened, where so many people were arguing about it that the Department of Defense was like, all right, we have these parameters. If you match these parameters and you have enough, then like we'll add you to the code list. And anyway, so that's how we got there. And then there was this, well, we're going to clean this up. We're going to streamline it. And I knew right off the bat, I was like, there's no way that this goes well. You cannot streamline a complex issue like that. That's why it's very much all or nothing. That's why it ballooned up to the Order of the Jedi was an established, which is hilarious, by the way. Good job, Star Wars folks.
I follow it.
Right. But just, it is messy. It is complex. It is controversial. And you did see people exploiting it. You also saw people taking real advantage of it. There are a number of Norse pagans that get laughed at, mocked, ridiculed, that are very devout. Like, they hold services, they do their things, and whatever. And so they're, like I said, the Wiccan so it's, and then funny enough too, for all these Christian nationalists, the more they bring attention to it, like, the more people go to that. I don't know. There's a lot of outrage that I'm like, you're creating this for yourself.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, how much that will impact basic training, because so when I was in basic training, I was not a believer, but I went to church every Sunday, because in basic training, that gets you closer to like the PX where you can buy the snacks. So every Sunday, without fail, me and a bunch of guys feigned religion. So that way, like, we can leave the barracks and then hopefully try to smuggle, snacks from the store nearby. But I'm curious about your thoughts on chaplains' use of certain types of like religious language, kind of going back to the Christian nationalism thing, because we hear a lot of folks, especially kind of cut from the Christian nationalism cloth, they use very loaded language, maybe dog whistle type language, like armor of God or, like sword, I don't know, iron sharpens iron. And to probably like the lay observer, it just sounds like Christianese, but we know like to folks like Pete Hegseth or Doug Wilson, like this language is kind of designed to make you think of, you being a warrior for God. And in the context of being in the United States, like military, like you're a warrior for God who happens to be armed by the United States government. So I'd love to just get your sense of like, if one, you've ever heard of, chaplains having to kind of reconcile with using that kind of language, and if not, like, well, what's your thoughts on that kind of language coming from chaplains, especially kind of in this environment that we're living in? Because I know that you recently also just spoke with Mikey Weinstein, who was on this show as well. So I'd love to kind of just hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I was actually going through my notes and journals and looking at a few of the sermons and benedictions that I had written for some of my experiences in the chaplain candidate program. I did a benediction. I've done a few large dinner banquets, ceremony type things, and then I've just done some ministry prayer conversations and one-to-one counseling. But it really, that is the language. That's not even really unique to Christian National. I mean, that is very like mixing war and God is old, and so that is the fine, and that George Washington was like, I'm not doing this without it. And so I see that. You also, my whole thing was not so much ever emphasizing the violence. And I would hope that that's what chaplains refrain from. That's why this Hegseth stuff is really unique, because that really typically hasn't been, we have part of, I know this, now we're starting to get into white supremacy, Christian racism stuff, but part of the WASPy narrative is that they are so civilized, right? Even though that they're not, right? But if they're going to conquer you, it's going to be in suits, or it's going to be or trains or technology. It always has been like this for American white supremacy. Everyone else is savages. We dominate cleanly. We're like, and you even hear this when I start talking, I'll start talking about women's history rights, and they'll be like, yeah, but that's Christian men. You did that because you were around Christian men. Christian men are better than, these other faith men. And it's like, they have this narrative that they are the less savage, quote unquote, less whatever you want to call it.
Ned Flanders.
Right. But they're like, we're not, you should see what, something like jihadi terrorists, they'll compare them as Americans are the clean, upstanding. Yeah. And it's like, we got a lot of history that proves differently, bro. But that is the narrative in their head. They all think they're Captain America, right? And I don't know where I kind of went down a tangent trying to explain this narrative.
No,
but that is really historically there has been this almost sort of Captain America whole ness to it, and this different, aggressive, we're being persecuted, therefore we need to dominate, wholesale, total warfare. That dominionism, that's coming straight from that pipeline. And so that's where this rhetoric is. So there's always been God, country, God bless America. I mean, that phrase specifically was introduced during the Cold War, but that sentiment has always been there. But this hyper violent, targeted, it's I don't know. It's a lot. So
it is, and for our Marvel fans out there, I would just like to remind you that Captain America was bad in the comic series Secret Empire. I won't get too nerdy, but there's a cosmic cube, yes, and he was cloned, and yeah, it was a whole thing. And great series, by the way, which is really, really a great story kind of about our modern sort of current political climate. Anyways, my last question to you, Leigh. Things are really, really bad right now. And it's weird. It's like there's one side of the country, I think, that feels like we're in an existential crisis, and another side that's like, meh, like there's nothing. Like in your mind, like what do you think Americans should know about religious freedom in this country to be successful, for the next 2 years, I say, at least until Trump leaves office?
Religious freedom or religious pluralism really is that is the cog in the machine that makes all of this work. And as a historian, America's history is very ugly. The founding fathers are very controversial. But when we talk about this specific line of logic, even though it was implemented by white, rich, patriarchal, aristocrat, slave owners, and rapist races, that line of thinking is what allowed Jews to be able to vote very early on, Catholics to be able to vote very on, like women, and then as it expanded, that line of logic has been what has allowed so much of our civil rights to come to fruition. And when you look at that on like the global space, I know we like look at different countries and we're like, there's so much more progressive or like, but when you think about history, like Rome did not have what we have. Like, and that's crazy that we created that. And we did it in such a short amount of time. We modeled ourselves after Rome, but it had been 2,000 years later. And I think the civil rights that have come from it, I think a lot of there's just so much amazing beauty that has come from the United States and how religious pluralism has been actually the bedrock for so much and so much good in this country, in this history, and again, in a global way. And again, it's really cool to have the way that I interpret Jesus when I read the Gospels, to also see that there, like, even though there is a whole side of the world that doesn't, or side of the country that's like, I don't care. There is a whole number of us, we're small, that are like, no, but Jesus did fight against empire. Like, he did. And we'll show you, and we'll go live that. And we'll so I do, like, it's small but mighty. And that is the beautiful story also about Jesus. Is 2,000 years later, Rome's going to do what Rome's going to do, but so is the story and the power of Jesus. So here we are, and old enemies.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, so I came to the faith in 2008. I'm one of those types of Christians that probably don't read his Bible enough and don't know enough Bible verses and whatnot. But I do think that there is something to this Jesus guy. And, it's like folks that I want to say, quote unquote, get it, folks that realize that, hey, regardless of what you think about Jesus, like, he was a very influential figure. And I think that following sort of his example of the way he kind of dealt with a lot of the religious elites at the time can be very, helpful for us to kind of figure out what we're going to do about our current state of affairs. So, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, Leigh. How can people follow your work and just, check out what you're doing?
So I am at Follow the Leighder. Leighder is Leigh. I am on all the things. So TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Substack, Threads, YouTube. But yeah, come join me. I have all sorts of really awesome guests. I hope, Will, that you will come on mine in return. We talk a lot about Christian nationalism, women's history, and also public lands, because out here in Montana, we're fighting the data center fight pretty hard. So anyway, I really hope that y'all will come check out some of my content as I talk about Christian nationalism and U.S. military chaplaincy. This is a serious concern, as Will has stated. This is the ironic intersection of church and state. And between that, the U.S. superpower military and AI, I am concerned that we're looking at a whole epic EPOCH of Christianity that is like as significant as like the Protestant Reformation or the Crusades or Constantine. Like, I think we're in a huge moment historically, and if it feels topsy-turvy, you're not crazy. Make sure that you have your allies. Please go touch grass and do have some sort of practice that connects you to your higher purpose, however you define that, because it's going to get rocky, folks.
So true. Thank you so much, Leigh, for coming on. This has been, it's been great. And I accept. I will come on your show. And to our audience, hey, thanks for stopping by again. And as always, make sure you keep your conversations not right or left, but up. And we'll see you next time. Take care.